Hey, Happy New Year to you. Welcome to Huddle Up with Howard here on ClaibsOnline.com. I am Joe Roderick, in for Mike Claiborne today, joined alongside by the Mizzou Hall of Famer. He is Howard Richards. And Howard, I know it's a Saturday, I know it's a holiday, but we got two huge football games taking place in a few hours from now, so we had to come on here and give a preview of what's about to happen.
Well, listen, if it wasn't a holiday and if it wasn't a Saturday, then where would we be? We'd be lost, right? But this is that time of year, and the fact that it is on a Saturday makes it that much more, I think, perfect. You got a whole weekend to recover from a New Year's Eve, football, eating, drinking. So I think this is like the perfect setup for if you're a sports person, especially football. This is the ideal weekend.
And for everybody, we're looking forward to 3:00 as that first game kicks off this afternoon. 3:00, 7:00, the times for those for the kickoffs today. I can't wait for a few years from now when we get that field of 12 and we get even more of these games. We get 4 of these one weekend, 2 the next weekend, leading into that championship game.
It's going to be exciting, and it's going to be, initially I thought it was going to be next year, but apparently next season, the 2023 season, will be the final year of the current format with 4 teams. So basically 2 years from now, we will be entertained by a field of 12 teams in a real live college football playoff that everyone has been craving for some time. So I know I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners are looking forward to it as well.
And I said 4-2-1. I guess it would be 4 games, 2 games, 1 game with the 12 teams set up. But we still have some time to figure out how all of that's going to work. Right now, though, still pretty simple. 4 teams enter. After today, we will know who's in that championship game that'll be taking place out in Los Angeles this year. Right? Yeah, SoFi Stadium, where the championship game is this year. Starting off, though, at 3:00, we have the Fiesta Bowl, a game between TCU and Michigan. Of the 2 games that we have today, Howard, I think this is the one that is the most likely to be competitive between TCU, who went all season long undefeated before finally losing in that Big 12 championship game to Kansas State, taking on Michigan, Jim Harbaugh's team that he has turned into quite a program up there in Ann Arbor. What are your initial thoughts on what we're going to see in this game between these 2 teams?
Certainly TCU, in spite of being undefeated, I think is a team that it feels probably a little disrespected and will be playing with a chip on its shoulder. TCU is not a blue blood football program. I mean, for years, TCU was sort of a doormat remember the old Southwest Conference? With the old, Texas, SMU, Texas Tech, all those teams back in the day. But quietly, this team has, I guess you could really give credit to Gary Patterson, emerged as a solid program. And this year, I don't know that anyone really expected TCU certainly to go undefeated, but even to have as strong a season as they did. But Max Duggan, their quarterback, I think had an outstanding year, and certainly was right there in the talk with the Heisman Trophy talk. And he's a guy that listen, I would never bet against him from what I have seen of him. Just all gut and hustle, but really determined as a player. Has overcome some physical obstacles in his past, and just a guy that, listen, he could turn out to be an outstanding pro. Okay. And he's going to enter the draft after the playoffs are over. Would not surprise me at all to see them beat Michigan as a surprise team. But that's why they play the game. But I think it's going to be exciting. I think that the energy in that game could make this even a more exciting game than the Georgia-Ohio State game coming up later.
TCU was a team that I think we looked at this past season and we waited for them to lose every week. you get off to the good start, and you see as you start to see those undefeated teams start to dwindle down and start to fade away. Every week it was like, all right, well, TCU's has to lose at some point. TCU has to lose at some point. And then when they make it undefeated all the way to that Big 12 game, you look at it, then you go, okay, no matter what happened in this game, they deserved a spot in there. And when you look at that loss that they had to Kansas State, and you look at what Max Duggan did in that game, he looked like he was hurt. He looked like he couldn't walk, couldn't breathe in that game, and put the team on his back. And I damn near led him to victory in that Big 12 championship game, but fell just short. And he lost out on the Heisman, which I don't think anybody really expected him to win anyway. But
Right.
still, it's been back-to-back disappointments now after an entire season of victories that maybe, as you mentioned, they do have that chip on their shoulder coming into this one.
Yeah. And he's such a competitor. And I remember seeing him at the end of that game in tears. And you just really felt bad for the guy. And again, with TCU sort of being a program that was just not really highly regarded for years, I found myself pulling for them. And my friend Reggie Blackwell would hate that, but I wanted him to beat Kansas State.
I cannot tell you how many times Reggie would send me an email as we do our picks on Claibs Online each and every week, and he was upset that a Kansas State game was not included in there because he just wanted to pick his Wildcats in a game. And that's what all he wanted to do was pick Kansas State, and he would get upset if I didn't include them in that week's games.
Well, I wonder if he picked them today. I'm sure he did. They're getting boat raced by Alabama, 35-13 right now, with about 6.5 minutes left to go in the third quarter. So I'm sure he's lamenting someplace but pulling for his Wildcats to somehow make a miraculous comeback.
Well, in this game, Howard, this was the TCU Michigan game was one of the games that we had on our picks this week, and you can hear how everybody picked if you go to Claibs Online and listen to this week's edition of Weekend Joe. Reggie did go with TCU in this game. He stuck true to the conference in this, picking TCU. Howard, I'm also on board with TCU after watching Max Duggan play a few times this year, but that Michigan team, we talk about how many times TCU was tested this past year. When you go and you look at what Michigan did this season, it was impressive victory after impressive victory, blowout after blowout. Their biggest scare came to the Fighting Illini late in the season when they pulled out the win with that last-second field goal. Outside of that, Michigan was never tested, and that includes the game where they blew out Ohio State at Ohio State. So as you come in here and you look at this Michigan team, I mean, all these weeks off, almost a month off now of football, Jim Harbaugh has to have these guys ready to go and focused, right?
No doubt. So it's funny you mentioned the Illinois game, and then you mentioned the Ohio State game. It made me wonder what team the Michigan Wolverines really are. Are they the team that almost lost to Illinois, or are they the team that blew out the Ohio State Buckeyes? And even though as you mentioned, they dominated their entire schedule until that final game against the Illini, it just had me wondering, who are we going to see? But I think, Jim Harbaugh, even though he's had some, of late, he hasn't done that well at Ohio State, at Michigan certainly by Michigan standards. But he has them. Every team in the country would love to be in Jim Harbaugh's place right now. The teams that are not in it, and he's been a good coach, and he is, unfazed by controversy. He's unfazed by, all the talk about whether or not he's a good coach or whether he's going to the NFL or whatever the case may be. So that's the one thing about Jim Harbaugh that I like. He is always himself. He never changes. He's kind of an old school throwback coach. And I think that is good for the game of football. And it's certainly the Michigan folks, I think you really got to love a guy like that, that came back and brought that program back into prominence, really. And listen, you can't be typically, unless you're Alabama or Georgia. You can't be in the playoff every year. And I think now with going forward with the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, it's going to be harder to be. Even though you're a blue blood program and you have the resources, I think it's going to bring those other teams. It's going to close the gap between the elite teams and the teams in the middle and at the bottom. So I think it's going to be harder to repeat, at least just from my opinion, going forward from year to year.
The spread on this game, Michigan by more than a touchdown. That's when you get to, you're talking about number 2 versus number 3 in the nation. That shows just how much respect Michigan has by the people that are putting those numbers on the game for today. What does TCU have to do to upset Michigan?
Well, they can't turn the ball over for sure. Dugan's got to be very accurate. They've got to give him a lot of protection, of course. And, defensively, they got to be able to stop the run. And Michigan, is really good at running football. So TCU's defense has to be stout. They've got to do well, I think, in the early downs versus second downs, and try to make Michigan as one-dimensional as they can. It may sound easier said than done. But I think for them to win, they're going to have to do that and then try to force turnovers themselves.
The other game, as we move across the country to Atlanta, Georgia, they're playing in their own backyard. It's the number 1 ranked Georgia Bulldogs taking on the Ohio State University, number 1 versus number 4. The last game that Ohio State played was that loss to Michigan. And now they kind of got in the back door of the college football playoffs. The committee, I guess, saw enough out of those first 11 wins to put them in there ahead of 2-loss Alabama or USC for that in there. So as you look at the Peach Bowl in this one, surprisingly, we just talked about the point spread between Michigan and TCU being 7.5. I feel like this game is going to be just a complete domination blowout by Georgia from what we've seen out of them this year. 5.5 points is all that Georgia's favored by.
And maybe the prognosticators, if you will, maybe they saw the Missouri-Georgia game and thought that this is the formula for being able to control the Georgia Bulldogs. And looked at Ohio State as a team that the game against Michigan was probably an anomaly, but they have the capability to play a much stouter game against Georgia. Maybe they feel that they match up better with the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, I wish I knew the reasons, because if I did, I'd be betting myself. But yeah, I think with CJ Stroud, who's been a consistent performer over the last couple of years, I think they feel that, with Georgia is a team that doesn't blitz a lot. They don't get a lot of sacks. And if you're an accurate thrower like Stroud and you can throw a deep ball also, they feel that maybe Georgia might be a little bit vulnerable. And that Ohio State has more weapons to make this game far more competitive. And if it's a competitive game late into the fourth, maybe Ohio State does have the weapons to overtake the Bulldogs, which, it's a team that hasn't really been challenged that much this season, outside of that Missouri game. And, if Missouri had any type of offensive prowess, they win that game against the Dogs. I mean, they're leading with, 6, 7, 8 minutes into the fourth quarter. But the defense just got tired. The offense could not complement the defense well enough to secure a victory.
Funny how the 2 closest games that the 1 and 2 seed played were both against, I guess, the local schools, if you will, from the area, Howard, that you and I cover the most, being the Illinois and Mizzou, 2 teams that didn't have phenomenal seasons by any standpoint, but held their own against 2 of the top teams in the country. Georgia was here last year. Georgia knows what they have to do to win and what they have done to win all season long. So in the last game, I asked you what TCU had to do to upset it. What does Georgia have to make sure they don't do to lose? I mean, when's the last time we saw Georgia lose a game? So we sit here. How do they continue that streak? How do they avoid slipping up here in their 2 biggest games of the season now?
Well, certainly with Georgia, Stetson Bennett has to have a good day. He's got to be, and for a little guy, he throws a great deep ball, and he's pretty accurate for the most part. Um, they've got to be able to protect him. That Missouri defense hit Bennett a lot, and he had his worst day to me as a starter against Missouri. Statistically, I believe that's probably true. Completed less than 50% of his passes that day, and Missouri hit him a lot. So their protection packages broke down, and that is really what bothered Bennett. If Georgia wants to avoid that type of scenario, you've got to give him time. And I think they have the weaponry on the outside just enough, and their running backs to get it done. But I think the key for Ohio State is if you can rattle Stetson Bennett, then you got a real good chance of coming away with a victory. If you can keep him on the run all day, and then hopefully he throws some erratic balls down here and maybe throws an interception or two. That's probably your easiest way to victory. Outside of that, I mean, that Georgia defense, they do things well. They're just steady, bend but don't break. They make big plays. They keep everything in front of them. But it's not a sexy way of doing so. Again, they're not blitzing and doing all these crazy things. They're just playing with their base players and say, beat us. So Ohio State, they've got to do something, I think, a little more fancy. Things that Georgia, they've really got to exploit whatever they feel Georgia's weaknesses are. And I think that one is if you can get to Bennett and hit him a lot and keep him on the run, that's their easiest path to victory.
CJ Stroud right now is projected to be the second quarterback taken in the draft. What does he have to do? What does he have to show you in this game to maybe jump ahead and be that top quarterback coming out?
Just be controlled, whether he's going to pull it and run it, but his accuracy has to be on point also. And again, have good command of his offense. Trying not to make any mistakes out there against a tremendous defense, one of the best defenses we've seen in college football. That's what Stroud's got to do. He's got to use his athleticism and his IQ as a quarterback to be better than that Georgia defense. He has the ability to do that, but will he be that man today? And I think, Buckeye fans everywhere are hoping that CJ Stroud is going to be that quarterback that will justify his projection as the second quarterback taking on the board in the upcoming NFL draft.
Well, all of that gets underway coming up here, 3 o'clock for the Fiesta Bowl, TCU and Michigan, and then 7 o'clock tonight for the game between Ohio State and Georgia. Howard, before we get out of here, one of your Mizzou Tigers made news recently. Quarterback Blaine Gabbert, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just the other day had it was, I guess, deemed a citizen hero after he and his two brothers rescued 4 people from the waters of Hillsborough Bay after a helicopter crash on Thursday night. Have you seen this story about your former Tiger quarterback?
I did, and I have to say I was pretty proud of him. But you talk about being in the right place at the right time. Apparently, as the story goes, there was a helicopter crash, a water crash, which fortunately none of the people on board were injured, which that's a blessing in and of itself. But you wonder if the Gabbert trio had not, they're in the Bay, Hillsborough Bay, jet skiing, just by happenstance, see this helicopter. I don't know if they actually saw it go down or if they saw the remnants of it out there. But skedaddled over there to the chopper, talked to the passengers on board, and made sure that everyone was okay. And then they ultimately called 911. Blaine put 2 of the passengers on the back of his jet ski, and each of his brothers, Tyler and Brett, put a passenger on the backs of their jet skis. And they got the passengers to safety. They left the pilot until the rescuers could get to him, but I don't think the pilot was hurt either. But you just never know. if it had been 5 minutes or an hour later, with no one else out there in the bay to figure out that there was a crash, maybe those folks succumb to that crash, drown, or whatever the case may be. But kudos to the local kids from St. Louis to be the heroes and out there saving lives just while having fun. You just never know when you're going to be in a situation to do great things, and glad that they were able to step up and do some good as we end the year of 2022. One of the good things that we can all celebrate.
And apparently Blaine just wanted to stay anonymous the whole time and not let anybody know. But I guess within an hour of it happening, the GM of the Bucks had already texted him, asking him if the stories that he heard were true. So word travels fast there. I guess the folks in Tampa know more than just the one quarterback that they have on their team.
Well, the first question he probably said was, "Are you nuts? Why are you on a jet ski? You're our backup quarterback. Don't you know you can get hurt out there?"
And he said, "Do you know who I back up? The guy never misses a game."
QB TB12, that guy. So he goes like, "Hey, don't worry about it. Tom's safe. I'm safe. We're all good here."
Well, Howard, it was a pleasure getting to fill in for Mike today, talking a little college football with you. Mike will be back next week, as you guys will have a championship game to break down. The winners of today will face each other on January 9th at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. Howard, have a safe new year. We will talk to you in 2023.
Outstanding, Joe. You have a happy and safe new year. And to all of our viewers and listeners, happy new year 2023.
He is Howard Richards. I am Joe Roderick. This has been Huddle Up with Howard, powered by Ameren, Illinois, driven by Munganast St. Louis Acura. And we're all right here on ClaibsOnline.com. Have a happy new year, everybody.
There's always been a bright side to living in downstate Illinois. Ameren, Illinois is making it even brighter with a little help from the sun. Right now, we're building a next-generation solar facility to bring you cleaner energy for generations to come. It's good for the environment, your neighborhood, and everyone living in downstate Illinois. That's brighter thinking. That's energy at work. Learn how you can participate in solar programs at amerenillinois.com/renewables.